She's been with Barack Obama since he decided to run for the U.S. presidency. Today, Susan Rice is considered one of his closest confidants. She was his UN ambassador. Now, she's his national security advisor.
I'm deeply honored and humbled to serve our country.
With her office just down the hall from his. Colleagues say he views her like a sister. She's tough, doesn't hold back, and doesn't suffer fools. Add all that to the fact she's married to a Canadian, and you've got someone anxious to get away, if only for the next 24 hours, from dealing with crises all over the world. I sat down with Susan Rice in the East Wing of the White House this afternoon. Ambassador, thank you for doing this.
It's great to be with you, Peter.
If we can start on border security, obviously both countries care about this issue. Perhaps the Americans a little more on the security side, but Canadians too. On the trade side, both countries, perhaps Canada a little more. How do you find the balance between security and trade?
Well, we obviously have the longest and most consequential border in the world. When you consider $2 billion a day in cross-border trade and the vast numbers of citizens on both sides that move across. So we have, as Canada does, a very deeply shared interest in having a secure border and an open border. And I think we've made considerable progress in recent years to advance that.
At the end of the day, does security trump trade?
At the end of the day, the president's most sacred responsibility is to protect the American people and our homeland and our allies and partners. So that for us is number one. However, so is the prosperity of our economy, the well-being of our people contribute to our security. So they aren't divisible. And we view Canada as being an essential partner in both.
I'd like to talk for a moment about the refugee situation, which has had its controversy on both sides of the border. Canada, as you know, has allowed in so far 25,000 Syrian refugees. The government has said in the last few days that as part of the vetting process, they use the U.S. biometric system to check each of those 25,000. Is that a normal procedure?
I don't know if it's normal for countries to utilize our biometric process, but given that our systems are so linked and we have the ability to share, we think that's something that's mutually beneficial. So as we both are increasing our intakes from parts of the world where we have security as well as humanitarian imperatives, our ability to share information and to exchange biometric information is vital to both sides.
I'm just wondering how that vetting process works. I mean, if the names go through the U.S. system and a red flag pops up, what happens at that point? You just advise Canada, or do you have a veto? How does that work?
I'm not steeped in the details, so I doubt we have a veto over any sovereign country's decision making. I'm quite certain we don't. But I think what we would do is share with our Canadian colleagues the information that we have uncovered and allow them to make judgments based on that.
As you can imagine, in both these issues, whether it's border access and the sharing of information there, or whether it's on the refugees, there are people on both sides of the border who worry about privacy matters. So when you hear those concerns being raised about information sharing, data sharing, how do you answer that yourself? What do you say to those who are concerned about that?
This is something that we take very, very seriously, and we have put in place what we believe to be very serious and significant protections for the privacy of our own citizens and increasingly for the privacy of foreigners. When we went through the reform process that came in the wake of the Snowden experience, we completely revised how we treat the information that we may gather for very targeted and limited intelligence purposes for foreign personalities, which is not something that other countries commit to do. So this issue of privacy and information sharing is one that we're careful about, concerned about, and increasingly keen to work with our closest partners to get that balance right.
You are familiar with the Canadian file for obviously a number of reasons, including personal ones, so the name Maher doesn't surprise you. On this topic of information sharing. And that, I guess, is where some in Canada worry that there is just too much data available from Canadian files to American files. How do you handle that? How do you respond to that?
I think from the American perspective, frankly, our concern is not that there's too much, but that at times there's been too little. Yes, there have been individual incidents that have been problematic or regrettable, but in general, as two democracies committed to protection of rights and liberties, sharing values, and then sharing this extraordinarily important shared border, we think that we have to get to the point where we can find ways and means of sharing information while protecting it, and doing at the same time what we must to ensure that what has transpired in 9/11, what transpired in Ottawa or San Bernardino, is not a day-to-day occurrence in our countries. And with the threat that we face, internationally and domestically, that is a real risk. And I know it's one that Canadians take seriously. It's certainly one that the Americans take very, very seriously.
So just so I understand it correctly, you're saying that there needs to be more sharing of information, not
from
less.
the U.S. point of view, yes, more is better. We have to do it carefully. We have to do it with very clear understandings and protocols. But we're not serving our people on either side of the border well by hiding or protecting stuff to the point that we're leaving each other vulnerable.
Are you receiving reluctance from the Canadian side on that, or are you seeing understanding?
Well, I think we understand the sensitivity of this issue in Canada, and there's history behind it. But I think we've been pleased to see that as we've worked together to make progress on a whole range of issues in the security space, including in the run-up to the Prime Minister's visit, that we have more in common than we have differences on both the objectives and the means of achieving them.
You know, from having spent time in Canada and knowing the country pretty well, that at times Canadians worry about the relationship with Americans from the sense that they feel that the Americans really don't care much about Canada or know much about Canada. You've been sitting next to the most powerful man in the world for most of his term, if not all of his term, plus the campaign leading up to it. Have you ever had to, not to him necessarily, but to other members of his cabinet, say, you know, actually, that's not what happens in Canada?
I've never had to say that's not what happens in Canada. I think senior government officials who work on international issues every day do have a pretty keen appreciation of the importance of the U.S.-Canada relationship and the nature of Canada. I may bring a few particular perspectives, having some Canadian family and having lived in Canada for a few years. But I think that broadly speaking, and this is the message of this visit, which we're very excited about here, the U.S.-Canada relationship is one of inseparability. We have extraordinary economic ties, trade ties, cultural ties, values, people-to-people ties, and a very shared stake in our mutual security. And if you ask anybody who lives on any of our northern border states, there's no ambiguity up there. And I think for most Americans, when they sit and think about Canada, the reason it may not be the issue foremost on the agenda is because it is a country that is working and is a good partner, and that we have faith and confidence in, and that we worry more about those parts of the world that are causing real challenges and problems. Canada is a good friend and a very, very reliable ally.
This must be a nice break for you.
It is.
The kind of countries you normally, initiatives you normally have to deal with. Ambassador Rice, thank you so much.
Thanks. It's great to be with you.